Kira ran, bare feet on wet pavement, breath breaking apart in the Chicago night. Behind her, footsteps that wouldn't stop steady, urgent, getting closer. She turned into an alley and pressed her back against the cold brick wall. Her hands trembled. Not from fear, from anger, the kind that had been buried for 18 years and was now rising to her throat. Inside her jacket pocket was a USB drive, small, but enough to bring down an empire. And the person chasing her wasn't a stranger, wasn't a hired killer. It was her own blood. But this story didn't begin in that alley. It began somewhere much darker, where a girl lost everything, was forgotten by everyone, and was forced to become something no one ever expected. If this story touched you, please like and share it so more people can hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next stories. That name didn't exist in any system. No papers, no address, no phone number. To the outside world, she was a ghost, and she liked it that way. The basement of the old warehouse on the south side of Chicago was thick with the smell of sweat and damp concrete. The crowd stood packed around an open space in the middle of the floor, mouths shouting, hands raised with betting money. Murky yellow light poured down from a few bulbs hanging loose from the ceiling. This was the underground world, a place with no rules, no referee, no lawyers. Only 2 people walked in, and 1 person walked out. Kira walked out. She moved through the crowd without looking at anyone. Sweat still dampened her forehead. Her knuckles stung a little from the friction, but her steps were steady and light. The organizer handed her a stack of cash. She tucked it into her coat pocket without counting it. No one congratulated her. No one patted her shoulder. No one said a word. Here, people didn't make friends with Kira. People avoided her. They called her the Ghost. Because once she finished fighting, she disappeared. She didn't stay to celebrate, didn't drink, didn't talk. She appeared. She won. And then she dissolved into the darkness, as if she had never been there at all. No one knew where she lived. No one knew what her real name was, and no one dared to ask. She pushed open the heavy iron door at the back of the warehouse and stepped outside. The Chicago night cut cold. Wind from Lake Michigan blew straight into her face, but she didn't shrink back. She'd been used to the cold for a long time. Kira walked through the empty streets. Her footsteps made no sound. It wasn't a habit. It was instinct. Her eyes kept moving, sweeping from left to right, from rooftops down to the street, registering every movement, no matter how small. A cat ran across the corner, and she knew it. A man stood smoking in the darkness 50 meters away, and she knew it. A car was parked at the end of the road with its engine still running, and she knew it. She knew everything without needing to turn her head. 15 minutes later, she arrived. Beneath the highway overpass on the west side, underneath it was an empty space most ordinary people would pass by without seeing anything. But if someone knew how, if they stepped in the right place and slipped through the right gap, they would find a narrow entrance leading down into an abandoned tunnel, enough room to lie down, dark enough that no one could find her. This was Kira's home. She sat down on the old blanket spread over the cement floor, took off her coat, folded it neatly. Then she stopped. Her hand rose to her chest, touching something small, hidden beneath the innermost layer of her clothes. She took it out, carefully, gently, as though it were the most fragile thing in the world. A small object rested in the palm of her hand. Its surface was worn, its corners softened by time, but she kept it cleaner than anything else she owned. Kira looked at it. For a long time, her eyes changed. The cold in them melted a little, giving way to something softer, deeper, more painful. But only for a moment. She folded it again and slipped it back into its place, right against the left side of her chest, the safest place she knew. Then she lay down. Her back touched the cold cement floor. Her eyes stayed open, staring up at the pitch-black ceiling of the tunnel. Outside, the city was still noisy. Cars still moved across the bridge above, making the ground beneath her tremble faintly. But to Kira, that sound was like a lullaby. She had heard it every night for many years. It wasn't pleasant, but it was familiar. And for her, familiar was enough. Kira closed her eyes, not because she was at peace, but because her body was exhausted. Tomorrow, she would wake before dawn again, train again, watch again, survive one more day again, just like every day before it. But she didn't know that tomorrow wouldn't be like every other day. Tomorrow, everything would change. and her life would never return to where it had been. The following night, Kira couldn't sleep. She climbed onto the roof of the old warehouse on the south side, the place she often went when her mind refused to settle. The city of Chicago stretched out below her, millions of lights flickering as if the place itself were breathing. The cold wind blew past, but she didn't care. She sat on the edge of the roof, both legs hanging down, her eyes fixed far ahead without truly seeing anything. On nights like this, memories had a way of finding her, not as clear pictures, but as fragments. The smell of olive oil heating in a pan, her mother's laughter in the kitchen, the kind of laughter the whole restaurant could hear. Her father's hand, large and warm, resting over hers as he taught her how to hold a vegetable knife for the first time. "Hold it firmly, but don't squeeze too hard," her father said. "Let it do the work for you." The small restaurant in Portland. Nothing fancy. But there were always people, always the smell of food, always laughter. Then the smell of smoke replaced everything. Everything changed when the lights of her childhood faded into the smoke. She didn't remember the night clearly, only the sudden coldness that followed and the knowledge that her world had become a memory. Someone pulling her outside. And the knowledge that after that night, her parents were gone. The restaurant was gone too. Everything she knew, everything she loved, vanished in a single night. Then Uncle Gordon appeared, her father's older brother. He came with a sorrowful face, said the right words, did the right things. Everyone believed him. But Kira, though she was still small, felt that something wasn't right. She couldn't name it then, but she could feel it. He wasn't grieving. He was waiting. Gordon took everything. The restaurant, the property, her parents' savings. Everything moved into his name so quickly that no one had time to ask questions. And Kira became a traveler of lonely roads, many houses, but no homes, many faces, but no one who truly saw her. She moved through the world like a shadow that didn't yet know where it belonged. When she was old enough, Kira left on her own. She told no one, took nothing with her except the clothes on her body and the small object hidden against her chest. She stepped out onto the streets and never went back. The streets taught her everything no other place had taught her how to read people through their eyes instead of their words, taught her where it was safe to sleep and where she had to stay away, taught her that a stranger's kindness always came with a price, and that the best way to survive was to need no one at all. Then she met him, an older man who lived beneath an overpass, not far from where she slept. He didn't talk much, didn't ask where she came from, didn't ask her name. But one night, when she almost got into trouble with a few drunk men passing by, he pulled her aside and said in a hoarse voice, "You don't need to be stronger than them, you need to be faster, and you need to disappear before they even understand what happened." From then on, he taught her, not how to fight. He taught her how to read an opponent before the opponent could read her, how to move without making a sound, how to vanish in a crowd, how to become no one. He died a few months later. One morning, Kira came to his spot and found him lying still. She sat beside him for a long time. Didn't cry, just sat there. Then she stood and kept going. After that, Kira entered the underground fights. She lost her first match, lost the second one too. But she didn't stop. She learned more from each defeat than other people learned from 10 victories. And eventually, she stopped losing. From then on, she didn't stop, not because she liked it, but because she didn't know any other way to survive. The wind blew harder across the warehouse roof. Kira pulled her coat tighter around herself. The pieces of memory slowly dissolved, returning her to the present. The city still shone below, and she was still here, alone, as always. 2 nights later, Kira won another fight, faster than usual. This opponent was 1.5 times her size, but he was slow, and slow was something Kira never forgave. She ended it in less than 3 minutes, tucked the money into her coat pocket, walked out the back door of the warehouse, disappeared into the night. Her way back to her tunnel took her through the abandoned industrial district on the west side. The old factories sat motionless in the darkness, with rusted iron doors and stained concrete walls. By day, the place was already empty. By night, it was completely dead. Kira liked passing through here, because there was no one. No lights, no noise, no need to stay alert. Only her footsteps and the sound of wind slipping through the cracks in the doors. But tonight was different. Kira heard it before she saw it, a sound that didn't belong here. Dragging, heavy, as if someone were pulling something weighty across the concrete ground. Then voices, pressed low, trying to stay quiet, but not quiet enough. Her instinct shifted at once into another state. Her shoulders lowered, her steps slowed, her breathing grew shallow. Her eyes swept to the left, where the sound was coming from. She stopped completely, leaned against the corner of a factory wall, hidden in total darkness. From that position she could see clearly. 4 men, dragging a 5th person into a warehouse whose iron door stood slightly open. The 5th person was blindfolded with black cloth, both hands tied behind his back. He tried to keep his balance, but he was constantly yanked forward. His feet scraped over the ground, making the dragging sound Kira had heard. She didn't move. She only watched. The 4 men moved with the coordination of people who had done this many times before. 1 man went ahead to open the door. 2 men dragged the victim. The 4th walked behind them, facing outward, keeping watch. They weren't rushing, but they weren't slow either. They knew what they were doing. Kira held her breath. Her ears caught every broken piece of conversation drifting through the still night. The ransom money has to arrive before noon tomorrow, and if it doesn't, then we finish it before morning. Clean. A low laugh, cold. Then the iron door closed with a long, scraping shriek. Kira stood still in the darkness. Her heart was beating faster than usual, but she controlled it. She could always control it. This wasn't her business. She knew that very well. She didn't know who the person inside that warehouse was. She didn't know him. He had nothing to do with her. She could turn away right now, go back to her tunnel, lie down, sleep, and tomorrow morning, everything would still be the same. Her life would remain what it was. Safe, silent, alone. But her feet didn't move. Something kept her there. Not kindness, not curiosity. Something deeper, older, more painful. She remembered what it felt like to lie alone in the dark as a child, waiting for someone to come, waiting for a hand to pull her out of the place where her old life had ended, waiting for someone to call her name. But no one came. No one had ever come. And now, inside that warehouse, someone else was waiting too. Waiting for someone to come save him. Maybe no one would come for him either. Kira bit her lower lip lightly. Then she breathed out, slow, long. The decision had been made before she had time to think any further. She didn't go home. Instead, she began to move. Slowly, silently, circling around to the back of the warehouse. Her footsteps were so light that even the gravel beneath her soles made no sound. She looked for a higher position, climbed onto the low wall of the factory beside it, flattened herself down, and watched from above. The warehouse had a main door in front, already closed, a side door in the back, slightly open. Inside, weak light from a flashlight or an oil lamp spilled through the crack. 4 men. 1 victim. No car outside, which meant they had come on foot or the vehicle had been hidden somewhere else. Kira noted everything. Each man's position through the shadows cast on the wall. The distance between the front door and the back door, about 15 meters. The voices told her 1 man was sitting, 2 were standing near the victim, and 1 was guarding the front door. She lay still, counted her breaths, waited. No hurry. She knew rushing was the fastest way to die. The old man beneath the overpass had taught her that. Never act when your enemy is most alert. Wait until they think they're safe. That's when they're weakest. Kira waited. 1 hour passed, then 2. The voices inside the warehouse grew fewer. The light dimmed. 1 of the 4 men yawned. Another sat back against the wall, his head dropping. Kira opened her eyes. Her body wasn't tired at all. The years on the streets had taught her how to wait without losing focus. She slowly slid down from the wall. Her feet touched the ground without a sound. She drew in a long breath. Then she began moving toward the warehouse's back door. The warehouse's back door stood open just wide enough for 1 person to slip through. Kira stopped at the edge of the doorway, her back pressed close to the wall, her ear angled toward the inside. The steady breathing of someone nodding off. The mutter of someone talking on the phone, his voice low and irritated. Weak light from an oil lamp set on the floor threw shadows up the wall. She looked around. About 5 meters from the back door, a short iron rod lay scattered across the concrete floor, probably what was left from old scaffolding. Kira picked it up, heavy enough to fit her hand. Then she looked toward the farthest corner of the warehouse, where the darkness was thickest, about 20 meters from the 4 men's position. She threw it. The iron rod cut through the air and struck a metal drum in the corner. The impact rang out sharply in the enclosed space, bouncing from one wall to the other. Instantly, every movement inside the warehouse changed. What was that? Go check. Fast. Two men sprang to their feet and rushed toward the far corner where the sound had come from. Their footsteps were heavy and hurried across the concrete floor. Just as Kira had calculated, human instinct always ran toward the noise, and when they ran, they left their backs exposed behind them. Kira slipped through the back door. Not a sound. The third man was standing with his back to her, his eyes following the two others, his hand still holding a phone. He hadn't had time to realize someone was behind him. Kira approached from the left, where his blind spot was. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. Then she struck. Fast. Clean. Her arm looped around his neck, tightening just enough, pulling him backward. He lost his balance, his feet scrambling over the floor. But he didn't have time to fight back. She used her body weight to drag him down, holding him until he stopped moving. The phone fell from his hand and touched the floor without a sound because it landed on a thick layer of dust. Kira lowered him gently, not because she cared, because of the noise. The fourth man stood closer to the victim. He turned back just in time to see his accomplice lying on the floor. His eyes widened. He charged toward Kira, his hand swinging out. She saw the blow before it arrived. She leaned to the right, feeling the rush of air sweep close past her left ear. He lost momentum when the strike missed, his center of gravity tipping forward. Kira turned, using her leg to sweep across his ankle. He fell face first onto the floor. Before he could roll over, Kira had pressed one knee into his back and pinned one hand down against the back of his neck. He struggled for a few seconds, then went still. 4 seconds. From the moment the fourth man turned back to the moment he lay on the floor. Only 4 seconds had passed. Kira didn't stop. She turned to the victim. He was sitting on the floor, his back against a steel column, both hands tied behind him with rope, his eyes covered by a piece of black cloth. She pulled the small knife she always kept tucked in her boot and cut through the ropes. The cord snapped. Then she pulled the blindfold down. The man blinked a few times, his eyes trying to adjust to the weak light. His face was bruised, his lips dry and cracked, his clothes disheveled. He had clearly been held for many hours, maybe even a whole day. But the first thing Kira noticed wasn't the wounds. It was his eyes. Alert, sharp, not panicked, not pleading. He looked at her with the gaze of someone assessing the situation, not someone waiting to be saved. "Can you stand?" Kira asked. "I can." His voice was hoarse but steady. She pulled him to his feet. Just then, footsteps echoed from the far corner. The two men who had gone to check had found nothing, and were coming back. Faster than she had calculated, Kira pulled the man into the darkness behind the steel column. "Quiet," she whispered. The two men stepped into the light, saw their accomplices lying on the floor, saw the place where the victim had been tied now empty. One of them swore, the other spun around, eyes sweeping across the warehouse. Kira was about to move, but the man beside her was faster. He picked up the iron rod from the floor, the one Kira had used earlier, left near the foot of the column. Before she could say anything, he rushed out. The first man swung his arm. The man used the iron rod to block it crosswise. The sound of metal striking metal rang out. He drove forward hard, using his full body weight to force the man to fall backward. Though he was hurt, though he was dehydrated, though his body was exhausted, he still held his ground. Not because of physical strength, because of instinct. The kind of instinct ordinary people didn't have. The kind of instinct that belonged to someone used to giving orders, used to facing danger, used to never stepping back. Kira didn't stand there watching. She moved to the side, approaching the final man from behind. He was turning toward his accomplice, and hadn't had time to react. Kira threw him down with one decisive twist of her body. His back struck the floor, his breath cut off by the force of the impact. She pressed him down and held him there until he no longer moved. Done. The warehouse fell silent again. Only the heavy breathing of two people remained as they stood among 4 motionless shadows on the floor. The man released the iron rod. It fell to the ground with a metallic clink. He bent over, both hands braced on his knees, breathing hard, but he didn't fall. Kira looked at him. A few seconds. Then she said the only 2 words. "Let's go." He lifted his head, looked at her, nodded. They both stepped out through the warehouse's back door. leaving the darkness and the men on the floor behind them. The Chicago night swallowed them in silence, and for the first time in a very long time, Kira wasn't walking alone. It took them nearly 40 minutes to get back beneath the overpass. Kira walked ahead, and the man followed behind. He tried to keep pace, but his body wouldn't allow it. A few times, he stumbled, his shoulder striking the fence along the road. Kira didn't turn back to support him. She only slowed her steps just enough for him to keep up, said nothing, asked nothing. Along the way, they found another man lying unconscious in an alley about 200 meters from the warehouse. A black suit, a small communication device in his ear, one hand still clenched tight even in unconsciousness, clearly a bodyguard. The man behind Kira recognized him at once. "He was with me," he said, his voice more urgent than before. "They took him down first, then came for me." Kira looked at the bodyguard, still breathing, pulse still beating. She pulled one of his arms over her shoulder, while the other man supported the remaining arm. The three of them moved in silence. Slower, heavier, but still moving. When they reached the tunnel, Kira laid the bodyguard down first. He was still unconscious, but his breathing was steadier. She checked him quickly. A bruise at the temple, probably struck from behind. Not much bleeding. She took her stored bottle of clean water, tore a strip of cloth from an old shirt rolled in the corner, soaked it, and wiped the wound. Not gently, but precisely. The man sat down beside the bodyguard, his eyes following every movement Kira made. She felt that gaze, but didn't turn back. After finishing with the bodyguard, she moved on to him. No questions. She simply sat down in front of him, took his hand, and examined the wrists reddened by the rope. Then his face. A bruise on his left cheekbone, his lower lip split, marks around his throat. She cleaned each wound one by one. The cloth touched his skin, and he grimaced slightly, but he didn't pull away, didn't make a sound. Silence stretched on. There was only the sound of water dripping somewhere in the tunnel and the muffled thunder of cars passing over the bridge above. Then he spoke. His voice was hoarse, slow, but clear. "My name is Ronan Calder." Kira didn't look up. Her hand was still cleaning the bruise on his wrist. Not a single reaction. Ronan watched her, waited. A few seconds passed. Nothing happened. She kept doing what she was doing, as if he had just told her the weather would be nice tomorrow. "You don't know that name?" he asked. Kira lifted her head. Her eyes met his directly, flat. Not curious, not impressed, not afraid. "No. Should I?" Ronan looked at her. For a long time, longer than anyone had ever dared to look straight into his eyes without turning away. Then the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Not a smile. Only the sign of something he hadn't felt in a long time. "No, maybe that's better." Kira didn't ask why. She released his hand, set the wet cloth aside, and handed him the bottle of water. "Drink." He drank, slowly, in small sips. His eyes still didn't leave her. There was something about this girl that made him unable to look away. Not because she was beautiful, not because she had just saved his life, but because she needed nothing from him, completely, not even a little. Ronan had met hundreds of people in his life. Partners, rivals, subordinates, enemies. They all wanted something from him. Money, power, protection, a promise, a nod. But the girl sitting in front of him in this dark tunnel beneath the overpass wanted nothing at all. And that was so strange. He didn't know how to react. "Why did you help me?" he asked. Kira was folding the wet cloth again, wringing out the water. She didn't look up. "Because I could." 3 words. No explanation, no philosophy, no emotion, only 3 words. And they weighed more than any speech Ronan had ever heard. He wanted to ask more, wanted to know who she was, where she lived, why she was alone in the middle of the night and skilled enough to take down 4 men. But he looked at her and understood that she wouldn't answer. Not because she was hiding, because she didn't see the need. Kira stood, walked to the corner of the tunnel, took the only thin blanket she had, brought it over, and laid it beside the bodyguard, who was still unconscious. Then she returned, sat back down in her old spot, and leaned her back against the concrete wall. "Sleep. We'll figure it out in the morning." Ronan looked at her. This girl had given the only blanket she owned to a stranger without hesitation, not because she was generous, but simply because the other man needed it more than she did. And for Kira, that was reason enough. He said nothing more. He lay down, his back touching the cold concrete floor, his eyes closed. But before sleep dragged him under, he heard Kira's steady breathing from the other side of the tunnel. She wasn't asleep. She was keeping watch. For him, for the bodyguard, for two strangers she owed nothing to. And Ronan Calder, the man half of Chicago knew by name, the man no one dared to look directly in the eye, lay in the dark tunnel beneath the overpass and thought only one thing before he slept. This girl, he wouldn't forget this girl. Kira woke while it was still dark. Habit. She opened her eyes and listened before moving. The cars above the bridge still rumbled. The wind still slipped through the cracks of the tunnel, but there was a new sound too. The breathing of two other people. She sat up. Ronan was already awake. He sat with his back against the wall, eyes open, watching her. She didn't know how long he had been awake. The bodyguard beside him had regained consciousness and was trying to sit up, his face twisting with pain. "He needs a hospital," Ronan said. "I know," Kira replied. Ronan reached into the pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a small device. She recognized it as the tracker sewn into the lining of his jacket, the same kind the other bodyguard wore on his wrist. Ronan pressed a button, said nothing, only pressed it. "My team will come," he said. "Soon." Kira didn't ask what team, how many people, or what they would arrive in. She only nodded, then stood and stepped out of the tunnel. The sky was shifting from black to gray. The city wasn't fully awake yet, but it had begun to stir. 40 minutes later, two large black vehicles stopped beneath the overpass. Not ordinary cars. Dark windows. Bodies heavier than normal, the kind of vehicles ordinary people didn't drive. 4 men stepped out, dressed in black suits, moving quickly and precisely. One man ran straight to Ronan. "Sir, we've searched everywhere." His voice was tense but controlled. Ronan raised a hand. "I'm fine." Only 3 words. The man immediately fell silent and stepped half a pace back. Kira stood several meters away, watching. The way these men looked at Ronan, the way they moved around him, the way the whole air changed when he stood and stepped into the light. This was no ordinary businessman. She didn't know who he was, but she knew he was someone everyone around him feared and respected at the same time. 2 men carried the bodyguard into the car. Ronan turned back to look at Kiraza. He stood 3 steps away from her. The early light fell over half his face, leaving the other half in shadow. The bruise on his cheekbone had turned deep purple, but his eyes were fully awake. "Come with me." It wasn't a question. It was an invitation, or almost an order, but his voice was softer than Kira had expected. She looked at him, then at the car, then back at him. "I don't belong anywhere." Ronan didn't react right away. He looked at her for a few more seconds. Then he gave a slight nod, as if he had already known the answer, but still wanted to hear it. "When you need me," he said, his voice low and slow, "ask anyone on the east side for Ronan Calder. They'll find me." Then he turned away, got into the car. The door closed. The vehicles rolled forward, turned onto the main road, and disappeared. Kira stood watching until she could no longer see them. Then she turned back into the tunnel, sat down in her old place, picked up the blanket and folded it, as if everything that had just happened were only a long dream. 3 days passed. Kira lived as usual. Trained. Ate. Slept. Went to the underground fights at night. Won. Tucked the money into her pocket. Returned to the tunnel. Repeated it all. But on the 3rd night, as she walked back beneath the overpass, she smelled smoke before she saw the fire. Her tunnel was burning. Kira ran, rushed inside. Thick smoke stung her eyes. The blanket had turned to ash. The water bottle was shattered. The bag of clothes was scorched. Everything she had, little as it already was now being slowly swallowed by fire. And she knew who had done it. The men from the underground fights. She had won too much, taken too much of their betting money. They had found where she lived, and they wanted her to know there was nowhere safe. But Kira didn't look at the flames. Her eyes swept through the tunnel, searching for one thing. In the far corner, the fire was licking close to the patch of cement where she usually slept. And there, lying on the ground, was it, the small thing she hid against her chest every day. Tonight she had left it behind because she thought she would come back early. The little notebook, worn leather cover. Inside were handwritten lines, her mother's recipes. Kira charged through the fire. The flames licked over her arm, searing hot, tearing at her skin. She didn't stop. Her hand seized the notebook, clutched it tight against her chest, and she rolled back out. Her back struck the concrete ground outside the tunnel. She lay there, gasping, eyes staring up at the night sky. Her left hand burned fiercely, the skin red and blistering, but her right hand still held the notebook, tight, refusing to let go. She opened it to check, page by page. Her mother's handwriting was still there, fainter than before, but still readable, still intact. Kira closed the notebook, slipped it into her shirt against her chest, then stood. The tunnel behind her was still burning. Everything she had built over many years was turning to ash. Her place to sleep, her place to hide, the only place she had ever called her own, gone. Kira stood amid the wreckage, her face dimly lit by the dying flames. She didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't punch the wall. She only stood still, watching. And for the first time in many years, a thought formed clearly in her mind, clearer than any thought that had come before it. If she kept living like this, she would die. Not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but someday. And when that day came, no one would know, no one would remember. She would truly disappear, not as the ghost she had chosen to become, but in the way no one chooses. Her hand rose to her chest, touching the notebook through the fabric of her shirt. It was still warm from escaping the fire. Then she remembered a sentence, a hoarse voice, slow and clear. "When you need me, ask anyone on the east side for Ronan Calder." Kira stood there a little longer. Then she turned her back on the ashes and began to walk. Kira reached the east side just as dawn broke. The neighborhood was waking up then, a few shops beginning to open, the smell of coffee and toasted bread drifting through the cold air. She walked along the sidewalk, her eyes sweeping over every face until she stopped in front of a street breakfast cart. The vendor was an old man with silver hair, arranging bread on a tray. "Ronan Calder," Kira said. 2 words. No hello, no explanation, no apology for asking. The old man looked up, looked at her. His eyes changed, only for one very brief moment, long enough for Kira to recognize that the name carried weight in this place. He didn't ask why, didn't ask who she was. He only gave a slight nod and said, "Wait here." He turned inside, picked up the phone, and said a few words Kira couldn't hear clearly. Then he came back. "Wait here," he repeated. Kira waited. She didn't sit down, didn't lean against the wall, didn't look at a phone because she didn't have one. She only stood there, back straight, eyes watching the stream of people passing by. 40 minutes later, a black car stopped at the curb. The same kind of car she had seen beneath the overpass 3 days earlier. The rear door opened. The driver didn't step out, only nodded toward her through the rearview mirror. Kira got into the car. Without hesitation, the car drove for about 30 minutes, leaving the east side behind, passing onto wider roads, quieter roads, roads with more trees. The neighborhood slowly changed. The houses grew taller, the fences more closed off, the distance between homes wider. Then the car stopped in front of a large iron gate. The gate opened automatically. The car rolled inside. Kira looked through the window. She didn't widen her eyes, didn't open her mouth, didn't say God or anything else an ordinary person might say the first time they saw a place like this. She only looked, took it in, then stepped out of the car when it came to a full stop. Ronan stood in the foyer. He looked entirely different from the night in the tunnel. Clean clothes, neat hair, the bruises on his face already treated, but his eyes were the same. Still that look, alert, sharp, silently assessing everything. He watched Kira walk in, looked at her left hand, where the red burn still showed beyond her sleeve. He didn't ask what had happened, didn't ask why she had changed her mind, didn't ask anything at all. "Your room is on the 2nd floor. We'll talk tomorrow morning." That was all. Then he turned and walked away. An older woman appeared and led Kira up the stairs. Kira followed behind, her eyes still moving constantly. Wide staircase, long hallway, heavy bedroom door. Inside, a room many times larger than the tunnel beneath the overpass. A wide bed, white blankets, a window looking out over the garden. The woman said something about towels and dinner, but Kira didn't really hear. She waited until the woman went out and closed the door. Then she stood in the middle of the room, alone, looking around. 4 walls, a lock. Enough. She pulled the notebook from inside her shirt, placed it beneath the pillow. then sat down on the edge of the bed. The feeling was strange. Soft mattress, light blanket. Everything so clean and quiet it was uncomfortable. No thunder of cars on the bridge. No wind slipping through cracks in the wall. No smell of damp concrete. Only silence. The kind of silence Kira wasn't used to. She lay down on the bed, closed her eyes, tried to sleep. She couldn't. The mattress was too soft, the blanket too warm. Her body was used to hard things, to cold, to discomfort. It had been trained for many years to stay alert even while sleeping. And now, lying on a comfortable bed in a safe room, her body didn't know what to do. It refused to relax. Kira opened her eyes, looked up at the pure white ceiling, lay there for a few more minutes. Then she sat up, pulled the blanket off the bed, and spread it on the floor. The marble floor was icy beneath her back. Familiar. She pulled the pillow down, rested her head on it, and lifted her hand to her chest, touching the notebook beneath the pillow. Still there, still safe. Kira closed her eyes. And this time, on the cold stone floor in the middle of a vast room where anyone else would have slept soundly on the bed, she drifted off, just like every night before. Just like always. But not everything was the same, because for the first time in a very long time, when Kira slept, her bedroom door had a lock, and behind that door, in a world she didn't yet understand, there was a man who owed her his life. And he wasn't the kind of man who forgot. 3 days passed, then 4 days, then 5 days. Ronan said nothing more to Kira after that sentence. We'll talk tomorrow morning. But tomorrow morning came and went, and he didn't come for her. Didn't assign her work, didn't explain, didn't mention any plan at all. Kira didn't ask. She understood. This was his world. He had his own way of doing things. And she was new, a stranger who had stepped in from the street. Trust in a place like this wasn't given. It had to be earned. During those days, Kira lived in the mansion like a shadow. She woke before dawn and trained in the yard before anyone else was up. She ate alone in the kitchen, always sitting in a corner where she could see both the doors and the windows. She didn't speak to anyone unless spoken to first, and even then, her answers were only 1 or 2 words. The people who worked in the mansion looked at her with curiosity mixed with caution. Who was this girl? Why had the boss brought her here? But no one dared ask Ronan, and Kira didn't care about their questions. On the afternoon of the 5th day, a man approached her. He sat down beside Kira in the first-floor hallway, his expression relaxed and friendly, the kind of man used to making small talk. He began with a few polite lines. The weather, the food in the kitchen was good today. Whether she was getting used to this place yet, Kira didn't answer. She only sat still, looking straight ahead. Then he changed his tone. Softer, closer, as if sharing a secret. Hey, I know you're new here. You don't have a clear position yet. I understand what that feels like. He paused for 1 beat. Someone outside wants to know Ronan's daily travel schedule. Nothing much. Just times, routes, who goes with him. In return, you'll get enough money to start over in any city you want. Kira sat still. Her eyes weren't on the man. Her eyes were on the corner of the hallway ceiling. There, a small security camera was recording. And during the words he had just spoken, the man sitting beside her had glanced up at that camera. Once when he began speaking, once after he finished. Twice, someone who truly wanted to betray would never look at the camera. They would avoid it. They would choose a place with no camera to talk. But this man sat directly beneath one and glanced up at it, unconsciously, as if checking whether someone was watching the conversation. Not because he was afraid of being caught, because he was afraid it wouldn't be recorded. A test. Kira understood at once. She said nothing, stood up, walked away. The man stayed there alone, perhaps wondering how she would react, perhaps waiting for her to run and report it. But Kira did nothing. Not that day. The next morning, Kira went straight to the 3rd floor. Ronan's office sat at the end of the hallway, behind a heavy wooden door, always with one man standing guard outside. The guard stopped her. You don't have an appointment. Kira looked at him. Open the door. Her voice wasn't loud, wasn't soft, wasn't threatening, but something in her eyes made the guard hesitate. He looked at her for 2 more seconds, then knocked. Ronan sat behind his desk. In front of him were a stack of papers and a cup of black coffee. He looked up when Kira walked in, not surprised, as if he had known she would come. Kira stood before his desk. She didn't sit, though there was an empty chair. She looked straight into his eyes. "Next time you want to test me, don't send someone who acts badly." He looked at the camera twice. The room went silent. The guard behind Kira drew in a small breath. No one spoke to Ronan Calder in that tone. No one. Ronan looked at her. A few seconds passed. Long. Heavy. Then something no one in that room expected happened. The corner of Ronan's mouth lifted. Lightly. Briefly. But truly. Not the polite smile he used in meetings. Not the cold smile his men were used to seeing when he had just won. This was a different kind of smile. The kind he perhaps hadn't used in a very long time. The guard behind Kira blinked. He had worked for Ronan for 3 years. He had never seen the boss smile like that. "You start tomorrow," Ronan said, his voice calm again. "Security. You'll see everything, hear everything, but you report only to me." Kira nodded. She didn't ask about salary, didn't ask about working hours, didn't ask about benefits, a contract, or anything ordinary people would ask when assigned a job. To her, having a place to stay and work to do was already more than anything she had ever had in her life. Anything more would be excess. She turned and walked out of the room. The door closed behind her. Ronan sat still, looking at the closed door. The coffee on his desk slowly cooled. He didn't drink it. He was thinking. In 3 years of running this empire, he had tested dozens of people. Each person had reacted differently. Some were afraid, some were angry, some pretended not to understand. Some ran to report immediately to gain favor. But no one, not one person, had ever walked straight into his office and told him to his face that his test was too easy. Ronan lifted the cup of coffee, took a sip. It had gone cold, but he didn't notice. This girl was more interesting than he had thought. Kira started working the next day exactly as Ronan had said. Security. She was given an access card to the main building of Calder Industries in downtown Chicago, a 20-story glass tower standing in the financial district. She wasn't formally introduced to anyone. There was no welcome meeting, no one assigned to guide her. Ronan only said one sentence to the security team. "She works for me. Give her access to every camera in the building." That was enough. On the first day, Kira sat in the monitoring room in the basement. 12 screens arranged in 3 rows, each screen divided into 4 camera angles. She didn't speak to the 2 security staff sitting beside her. She only watched. From morning to night, she watched. By the 3rd day, she noticed something unusual. A warehouse employee on the 4th floor. He moved normally throughout his shift, but every 2 hours, he stepped into the east corridor, where there was a camera blind spot about 4 meters long. Each time he entered that blind spot, he disappeared for about 90 seconds, then came back out. When he went in, he carried a box. When he came out, his hands were empty, but the box never appeared in the destination storage. Kira observed for 2 more days to be certain. Then she reported to Ronan. Brief. Direct. 4th floor warehouse staff. East corridor. Camera blind spot. 90 seconds every 2 hours. Goods don't reach storage. Ronan checked. It was correct. That employee had been smuggling goods out for 4 months without anyone noticing, until Kira sat in front of the screens for 3 days. The news spread quickly through the security team. No one said anything directly to Kira, but she could feel the shift in their eyes, from curiosity to caution, from caution to discomfort, especially one person, the head of security, the man who had overseen the surveillance system before Kira arrived. He had worked for Ronan for 3 years, and considered himself the eyes and ears of the organization, and now, a girl from nowhere had taken his seat and done better than him in 3 days. He said nothing through the first week, but by the end of the week, during a security meeting, he proposed a test. His voice calm, but his eyes fixed on Kira. "We should test the team's response capability, an intrusion test. One person acts as an unauthorized intruder in the building. The security team's task is to find that person within 10 minutes. He turned to Kira. "Everyone participates." Kira said nothing, only nodded. The test began. A 20-story building, hundreds of rooms, dozens of corridors, 4 stairwells, 6 elevators. The mock intruder could be anywhere. The best record the security team had ever achieved was 8 minutes and 12 seconds. Kira didn't watch the cameras. She didn't run floor-to-floor searching. She stood still in the 1st floor lobby, closed her eyes for 3 seconds, then opened them. She looked at the elevator panel. The 14th floor had just been selected, but the 14th floor was empty, according to the day's schedule. No meetings, no assigned staff. She stepped into the elevator, pressed 14, went up, walked out into the hallway, turned left, passed 3 doors, stopped at the 4th, opened it. The mock intruder sat inside, not yet settled into position. 4 minutes. Kira returned to the meeting room, sat back down in her seat, didn't say a word. The room was silent. The head of security looked at her, then looked down. No one said anything else. From that day on, no one in the team challenged her again. But the more important event happened at the end of that week. A finance department employee made a serious mistake in a fund transfer, causing the organization to lose a large amount. The news reached Ronan immediately. In the emergency meeting, a senior subordinate made a suggestion without hesitation. "Let me handle this the old way." Everyone in the room understood what that meant. No one objected. This was how things had always worked. Make a mistake, pay the price. Simple. But Kira, standing in the corner of the room as always, spoke. "He made the mistake because the system has a flaw." The entire room turned to look at her. The senior subordinate frowned. "What do you mean?" "I reviewed the transfer process. The 3rd confirmation step is skipped because the software auto-approves when the amount is below a certain threshold. That employee didn't intend to make an error. The system allowed him to." She paused. "Fixing the system is more effective than punishing the person." Silence. The senior subordinate opened his mouth to say something, but stopped when he saw Ronan raise his hand. Ronan looked at Kira, for a long time, the same way he had looked at her in the tunnel beneath the overpass. The same way when she had walked into his office and told him his test was too easy. Then he nodded. "Fix the system." 2 words. Enough. For the first time in the history of Ronan Calder's organization, a mistake was corrected without the person who made it paying the price. And for the first time, that change came from a girl who, only a few weeks earlier, had been sleeping on concrete beneath an overpass. In the weeks that followed, Kira and Ronan formed something neither of them named. Not friendship, not an ordinary superior and subordinate relationship, but recognition. The kind that came when 2 people realized they understood the world in the same way without needing to explain it. They didn't talk much. Kira gave brief reports every day. Ronan listened, nodded, or gave orders in 1 or 2 words. No small talk, no checking in, no asking whether she had slept well, whether she had eaten enough, whether she was getting used to the new place. And Kira didn't need anyone to ask her those questions. But there was one thing repeated every morning that Kira didn't know. She still woke before dawn, still went out to the mansion's backyard to train while the sky was dark. She ran, jumped, moved through the open spaces in the garden with the precision and silence she had spent years sharpening on the streets. And upstairs, behind the curtain of his bedroom window, Ronan stood watching, every morning. He didn't come down, didn't say anything, only stood there, holding a cup of coffee, his eyes following her as she moved in the first light of day. Then, when she stopped, he turned back inside and began his workday, as if it had never happened. Then came that night, 2 o'clock in the morning. Ronan opened his eyes. He didn't know what had woken him. Not a loud noise, not danger. Maybe it was the smell. Something drifting up from downstairs, faintly through the crack beneath the door. The smell of hot butter, fried onions, food being cooked. He lay still for a few seconds, listening. No voices, no footsteps from the staff, only the small sound of fire on the stove and the soft, steady stirring of a spoon touching the bottom of a pot. Ronan got up, didn't turn on the light, stepped into the hallway, and went downstairs. Warm yellow light from the kitchen spilled into the dark foyer. He walked to the kitchen doorway and stopped. Kira stood at the stove. Her back was to the door. She wore thin sleep clothes, her hair loose, bare feet on the cold tile floor. In front of her, on the kitchen counter, a small notebook with a worn leather cover lay open. The kitchen light shone over the handwritten lines inside. Slanted, gentle handwriting, not Kira's. On the stove, a small pot was simmering quietly. The fragrance filled the kitchen. Not the smell of a professional chef. The smell of memory. The smell Kira hadn't breathed in for many years. The smell from a small restaurant kitchen in Portland, where her mother had cooked every day, where her father had taught her how to hold a vegetable knife, where everything had once meant something. Kira stirred the pot. Her right hand held the spoon, moving slowly, evenly. But her left hand, the one with the burn from the night she had saved the notebook, was trembling. Not from pain, not from cold. Then Ronan saw it. Her shoulders trembled slightly. Very slightly. If he hadn't looked carefully, he wouldn't have noticed. Her head was bowed a little, and on her cheek, reflected in the yellow light, tears were sliding down. Silently. No sobbing, no shaken breath. Only tears falling while her hand kept stirring. Steady. Without stopping. She was cooking her mother's recipe again. For the first time after all those years on the streets, in the tunnel, in the dark, for the first time, she was standing in a real kitchen, with real ingredients, opening the notebook and following it, and everything she had buried deep for so many years, everything she had thought was dead, was coming back to life in the smell of that food. In each tear that fell, Ronan stood outside the doorway. His hand rested on the frame, but he didn't step through. He looked at her back, watched her shoulders tremble, watched the tears fall onto the counter while she didn't even wipe them away. He didn't go in, not because he didn't want to, because he understood. There were kinds of pain comfort couldn't reach. There were moments when another person's presence, no matter how well meant, would only make the weight heavier. This was Kira's moment alone, hers and her mother's, hers and that notebook. And Ronan, the man half of Chicago, didn't dare look directly in the eye, stood outside the kitchen in his own house at 2 o'clock in the morning, and chose the hardest thing he had ever done. Nothing at all. He stood there, silent, until Kira turned off the stove. Until she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Until she closed the notebook, carefully, the way someone might fold the last love letter. Until she tucked the notebook into her shirt, washed the pot, wiped the counter, and left everything as it had been, as if tonight had never happened. Then Ronan went back upstairs, his steps light, not a sound. Before Kira turned toward the door, he had already disappeared into the darkness of the hallway. She didn't know he had been there, and he would never tell her. But that night, when Ronan lay back in bed, eyes on the ceiling in the dark, he thought of one thing. That girl had survived everything. The streets, the underground fights, fire, loneliness. She was stronger than anyone he had ever met. But tonight, for the first time, he had seen what she hid most carefully. She still remembered. She still hurt. And she was still the little girl in that kitchen in Portland, cooking beside her mother. And somehow, that made him ache, in a place inside his chest he had thought had gone numb a long time ago. 2 weeks after the night in the kitchen, Kira's life inside the mansion and the Calder Industries building had settled into a steady rhythm, training in the morning, working in the monitoring room during the day, returning to her room at night, the notebook under her pillow, sleeping on the floor, repeating it all. She didn't complain, didn't demand, didn't expect anything more. To Kira, having a steady rhythm was already the greatest luxury she had ever known. That afternoon began normally, like every other day. Kira sat in the basement monitoring room, her eyes moving across the 12 camera screens. The lobby, hallways, elevators, conference rooms, storage rooms, parking garage, everything moved with the familiar rhythm of a workday. Employees came and went. Guests arrived for meetings. A delivery truck stopped at the rear gate. Nothing unusual. Then she moved to the camera on the 18th floor, the large conference room. Today there was a high-level meeting with real estate partners. Kira knew because she had checked the meeting schedule that morning, a habit she had formed on her own. On the screen, she saw Ronan sitting at the head of the table. 4 or 5 men in suits sat around him. A secretary was taking notes. Normal. Kira's eyes were moving to another screen when they stopped. Returned to the 18th floor camera. She looked more closely. The man sitting to Ronan's right, 2 seats away. Salt and pepper hair. A broad face. A square chin. Narrow eyes set deep beneath thick brows. His right hand rested on the table, his fingers tapping lightly against the wood. A habit Kira had seen thousands of times when she was little. Her heart beat faster. Her hand tightened around the edge of the desk. Gordon Ashford, her uncle, the man who had taken everything. Kira didn't stand, didn't run out of the room, didn't scream, didn't strike the desk. She sat still, eyes fixed on the screen, her fingers clenched white around the edge of the desk, but her face didn't change. The security employee beside her didn't even notice anything was different. 18 years. Kira looked at that face through the camera screen, and 18 years gathered into a single heartbeat. But she didn't let it pull her away. She breathed, slowly, deeply. Then she began to think. Gordon Ashford was sitting in Ronan Calder's conference room, not a passerby, not someone asking for a meeting. He was seated at the partner table, comfortable, confident, like a man who had sat there many times before. Kira pulled the partner file from the system. Gordon Ashford, chairman of Ashford Group, a real estate company, strategic partner of Calder Industries in 3 major projects across Chicago and the surrounding area. Partnership began 14 months ago. 14 months. Gordon had been in Ronan's orbit for more than a year without Kira knowing. But now she knew. And she knew one more thing. Gordon Ashford had left Portland with his brother's assets. He had used that money to build a real estate company. And now he was sitting beside Ronan, dealing with Ronan, inside Ronan's system. This wasn't coincidence. Gordon hadn't come here because of real estate. He had come because he needed a place to move money through legal transactions. And Ronan's organization, with dozens of real estate projects spread across Chicago, was the perfect place. Then Kira's eyes moved to the man sitting beside Gordon. Younger. About 30 years old. A long face, straight nose, hair neatly combed to one side. He wore a dark blue suit, sat with his back straight, and took notes in a notebook. Polite gestures. Professional. But his eyes, whenever Ronan spoke, weren't on the documents. His eyes were on Ronan, assessing, measuring. Kira pulled the file. Trent Ashford, Gordon's son, senior project manager at Calder Industries. Hired 11 months ago, 3 months after Gordon became a partner. The second piece. Kira leaned back in her chair. Her eyes left the screen and stared straight at the wall in front of her. Her mind was arranging everything. Gordon had used stolen money to build a company. Used the company to approach Ronan. Used Trent as a piece planted inside the organization. The purpose still wasn't clear. But Kira knew one thing for certain. Wherever Gordon Ashford appeared, someone there would lose something. She needed to find out what he wanted from Ronan, and she needed to do it without letting anyone know who she was. Because if Gordon recognized the niece he had left behind years ago, now sitting in the security monitoring room of his own partner, everything would change. And not in a good way. Kira lifted her hand to her chest, touched the notebook through the fabric of her shirt. Still there. Everything her mother had left behind was still there. And now, the man who had burned everything else was sitting on the 18th floor, 10 floors above her. Kira lowered her hand, turned back to the screen, continued working, her face unchanged, her hands steady. But inside her, something had shifted. She was no longer only Ronan Calder's security employee. She had just become a hunter, and the prey was right above her head. From that day on, Kira changed her work schedule without telling anyone. During the day, she still sat in the monitoring room as usual. But at night, when the building was almost empty, she came back, alone. In the monitoring room, there was no one but her, and the 12 screens glowing faintly in the darkness. She watched Gordon and Trent. The first night, nothing happened. The second night was the same, but on the third night, at 11:47, the basement camera captured Gordon stepping out of the rear elevator. 3 minutes later, Trent appeared from the stairwell. The two of them met in the old records storage area, a corner of the basement that people rarely passed through even during the day, and at night, it was completely deserted. No meeting scheduled. No legitimate reason for either of them to be there at that hour. Kira noted it. No reaction, only noted it. On the 5th night, they met again. Same place, same time. This time, longer, about 20 minutes. The basement camera had video but no sound. Kira looked closely. Gordon spoke. Trent listened. Now and then, Trent nodded. Now and then, he shook his head. Gordon pointed a great deal, his face tense. This wasn't a normal father and son conversation. This was a meeting. On the 7th night, the third time, Kira was ready. She zoomed in on the camera, adjusted the brightness, and began reading lips. She wasn't a professional lip reader, but the streets had taught her to read people from every angle, even when they weren't speaking to her. She focused on Gordon's mouth. Slowly, one word at a time. Phase 2. Clear. 2 words his mouth formed 3 times during the meeting. Then Trent spoke. She could read a few phrases. This time, leave nothing behind. And then, clearest of all, control the corporation. Kira leaned back. Her eyes left the screen and looked into the darkness of the monitoring room. Phase 2. That meant there had been a Phase 1. This time, leave nothing behind. That meant last time, something had been left behind. Control the corporation. That meant the final target was Calder Industries. Ronan. And last time, something had been left behind. Kira understood at once. The kidnapping. The night in the industrial district. 4 men. Ronan blindfolded, his hands tied. That hadn't been some random act by street criminals. That had been Phase 1. Staged by Gordon and Trent. And something had been left behind because Kira had appeared. The pieces were falling into place faster now. But Kira needed more. She needed proof, not guesses. She moved into the internal computer system. With the security access Ronan had given her, she could view the login history of every computer in the building. She found the computer Gordon usually used when he came for meetings, the one in the partner room on the 18th floor. The login history showed Gordon hadn't used that computer only for current work. He had accessed the old financial system, transaction records from many years earlier, files an ordinary partner had no reason to open. Kira opened each file, read each line. Most of it was real estate transactions, contracts, invoices, nothing unusual. Until she opened a personal transaction file Gordon had accessed 3 weeks earlier. Inside it was a large money transfer. The recipient had no name, only an overseas account number. The transfer date, Kira read it twice to be sure. The money had been sent exactly 2 weeks before the fire at her parents' restaurant, 18 years ago. Kira's hand stopped on the keyboard. She looked at the date on the screen, then looked again, then looked one more time, as if she were waiting for it to change. But it didn't change. That date lay still on the screen, glowing in the darkness, and it told her everything she needed to know. The fire hadn't been an accident. Gordon hadn't simply come after the fire to take the property. He had arranged the fire. The money sent 2 weeks before had been payment to the person who carried it out. Her parents hadn't died because of bad luck. They had died because Gordon wanted what they had, and he had been willing to kill his own brother to take it. Kira sat still. The monitoring room was dark. 12 screens flickered around her, but she saw nothing. She didn't cry, didn't tremble, didn't strike the desk. She only sat there, back straight, hands resting on the keyboard, eyes on the screen without truly seeing it, and breathed. Slowly, deeply, one breath at a time. Something inside her chest changed. Not breaking, not burning, freezing, completely. As if every feeling she had ever had, the pain, the anger, the longing, all of it had been pressed into one cold, solid mass and sunk to the deepest place inside her. She felt nothing anymore, only clarity, a terrifying kind of clarity. Kira took a USB drive from the pocket of her coat, plugged it into the computer, copied the entire transaction file, copied Gordon's access history, copied the camera footage from the 3 nights they had met in the basement. All of it. Everything. The progress bar moved across the screen. 10%, 30, 50, 70, 100. Kira pulled out the USB drive. Small, fitting neatly in her palm, lighter than a lighter. But inside it was enough evidence to destroy Gordon Ashford, destroy Trent, and perhaps destroy the entire structure of the empire Ronan had built. She slipped the USB drive into her coat pocket, the same pocket where, on the first night of this story, she had tucked her money before running through the Chicago night. Kira turned off the screen, stood, walked out of the monitoring room. Outside, the basement hallway was dark and silent. Her footsteps echoed lightly on the concrete floor. She knew she needed to tell Ronan, needed to give him this USB drive, needed to let him know that the partner he trusted was planning to destroy him. But she also knew something else. This USB drive wasn't only evidence of the plot against Ronan, it was evidence of her parents' deaths. And once she brought it into the light, everything would change. All of it. No going back. Kira stepped into the elevator, pressed the 2nd floor, returned to her room, placed the USB drive beneath her pillow, beside the notebook, the 2 smallest things she owned. One held her mother's memory, one held the truth about her mother's death. She lay down on the floor, closed her eyes, but tonight she couldn't sleep. Not because the floor was hard, because for the first time in her life, she knew the truth. And the truth was heavier than anything she had ever carried. The next morning, Kira planned to find Ronan. She needed to hand him the USB before Gordon and Trent could carry out their next move. But before she could leave the monitoring room, the internal phone on the desk rang. Trent's voice came through the line. Calm, polite, as always. Kira, can you come up to the conference room on the 15th floor? There's something we need to discuss. His tone held nothing unusual. Not urgent, not tense, but Kira recognized it immediately. The 15th floor had no meeting scheduled today. She had checked that in the morning. And Trent had never called her directly. Not once during all the time she had been working here. Something was wrong. Kira lowered her hand into the pocket of her coat, touched the USB drive. Still there. She thought for 3 seconds. If she didn't go, they would know she was avoiding them. If she went to find Ronan right now, she didn't know what Trent had already said to whom, what he had already prepared. She needed to know how much they knew before she acted. All right, 5 minutes. She hung up, looked around the monitoring room, pulled the USB drive from her coat pocket and moved it to a safer place, inside the lining of her right shoe. If they searched her pockets, they wouldn't find it. Then she stood and went up to the 15th floor. The hallway was empty. The conference room door was closed. Kira pushed it open and stepped inside. Trent sat at the head of the table. The same dark blue suit, the same straight-backed posture, hands resting on the table, fingers tapping lightly against the wood. But his eyes were different. No longer the polite, professional look Kira had seen through the cameras. His eyes were sharp, still, waiting. And on the other side of the table, Gordon Ashford sat with his arms folded across his chest. He watched Kira walk in. The door closed behind her. A soft click, but unmistakable. Trent spoke first. His voice remained calm, almost friendly, the kind of tone used when someone already knew the answer before asking. Find anything interesting? Kira stood 3 steps from the table. She didn't sit. Her eyes moved from Trent to Gordon, then back to Trent. She didn't answer. Trent tilted his head slightly. The system logs everything, you know. Which account accesses which file, which camera, at what time. I've noticed your account has been quite active at night lately. Basement cameras, old financial files. He paused. Interesting. Kira remained silent. Her eyes shifted to Gordon. He sat there, looking at her, and she looked back. 18 years compressed into the 3-meter distance between them. Then Gordon spoke. One word. Kira. Not a question. A confirmation. He knew who she was. Maybe he had known from the moment she walked through the door. Maybe Trent had shown him her photo from the personnel records. Maybe he recognized the eyes, her mother's eyes, his brother's eyes, the brother he had arranged to erase from the world. Trent glanced between Gordon and Kira. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. So, it's true. The little cousin from back then. Kira didn't react to that. Her eyes stayed on Gordon. He held her gaze for about 5 seconds before looking away. His hands tightened slightly on the table. You should forget what you saw, Gordon said. His voice tried to hold authority, but Kira heard what lay beneath it. Not confidence. Unease. Kira still said nothing. Her silence weighed heavier than any answer. Trent stood. Slowly, walked around the table, stopping closer to Kira. He folded his arms and tilted his head, studying her as if weighing his next move. All right. Let's do this, he said. His tone shifted, still calm, but sharper. You have 2 options. 1, you forget everything you saw. You return anything you've copied, and life goes on as usual. 2, he paused, looking directly into Kira's eyes. If you don't cooperate, Ronan will receive information that you're a spy planted inside the organization. A street nobody with no background, suddenly appearing and being placed directly into the security system by the boss. His voice dropped. What do you think a man like Ronan would do with that? The sentence settled in the room like a timed bomb. Kira looked at Trent, then at Gordon, then down at the floor, not out of fear, because she was calculating. How much did Ronan trust her? He had given her access to security. He had smiled when she exposed his test. He had nodded when she suggested fixing the system instead of punishing the employee. But trust? Real trust? Kira wasn't sure. She had been here only a few weeks. She had appeared out of nowhere, with no papers, no background, no past that could be verified. If Trent sent Ronan a fabricated report claiming she was a spy, with system logs showing her digging through financial files at night, the story would be convincing. And Kira knew better than anyone. In Ronan's world, spies weren't put on trial. Spies disappeared. She took a breath, then let it out, slow. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice flat. Trent smiled. Gordon exhaled softly in his chair. "Come with us," Trent said. "Leave the building. Quietly. No attention." Kira looked at the conference room door. Closed. Looked at the window. 15th floor. Looked at Trent. Looked at Gordon. Calculating. If she resisted now, inside Ronan's building, without clear proof of who was right, she would lose. Trent would activate his accusation. Ronan would receive false information, and the USB in her shoe would never reach the person who needed it. But if she went with them, she kept the USB. She bought time. And she knew something Gordon and Trent didn't. She was the ghost, and the ghost always disappeared when needed. Kira nodded. A small, precise nod. "Let's go." Trent opened the door. Gordon stood. The three of them stepped into the hallway. Trent in front, Kira in the middle, Gordon behind. They moved to the rear elevator, the one employees rarely used. Down to the basement, out through the side exit. A black car was already waiting outside. Kira stepped into the car, calm, controlled. Her hands hung at her sides, but her right toes curled slightly inside her shoe, feeling the small USB pressed against the sole of her foot. Still there, still safe. The car door closed, the vehicle moved, and Kira began to count, counting seconds, counting turns, counting distance, because she knew that at some point she would need to know exactly where she was. And when that moment came, she would be ready. The car drove west. Kira knew because she could see the sun sinking ahead through the windshield. Trent sat in the driver's seat, eyes fixed on the road, glancing at the rearview mirror now and then. Gordon sat beside Kira in the back seat, about half a meter away. He hadn't said anything since getting into the car. He only sat there with his arms folded across his chest, staring straight ahead, but Kira noticed the tightness in his jaw. He wasn't comfortable. Good. Kira sat still, her back against the seat, both hands resting on her thighs, her face without expression. On the outside, she looked like someone who had accepted things. Inside, she was working. The clock on the dashboard showed 4:23 in the afternoon. Kira remembered it. The car turned right onto the highway. She read the sign. Interstate 90, westbound. Speed around 70 miles an hour. She began to count. With each minute that passed, she estimated a little over a mile more. If she needed to return, she would know how far she was from downtown Chicago. 10 minutes. 15 minutes. 20 minutes. The car left the highway and turned onto a side road. The area grew more sparsely populated. The houses were lower, the distance between them wider. Fewer streetlights. Kira looked out through the window, marking the location. A small church on the left, an abandoned bus stop on the right, a sign bearing the name of a small town she had never heard of. She didn't need to know the name. She needed to know the direction. 32 minutes after she got into the car, Trent turned on the signal. The car slowed. A gas station. Small, sitting at the fork of a deserted road. 2 pumps, a lit convenience store, an empty parking lot behind it, and most importantly, thick darkness right behind the store building, where the lights couldn't reach. Kira saw all of it in less than 2 seconds. Her instinct had finished scanning before the car had fully stopped. Trent turned off the engine. "Gas," he said curtly, then opened the door and stepped out. Gordon remained seated for a few more seconds, looking at Kira. "Don't think about anything you shouldn't," he said. Then he opened the door, stepped out, took out his phone, and walked toward the back of the car, beginning to call someone. His voice grew smaller as he moved farther away. Trent stood by the pump, holding the nozzle. The gas station attendant came out of the store and walked toward him. The two exchanged a few words. Trent's back was turned to the car. Gordon stood about 10 meters from the vehicle, his back to her, the phone pressed to his ear. Kira counted. 1, 2, 3. Her right hand reached toward the door on the opposite side, the side where no one stood. Her fingers found the handle, pulled gently, softer than a breath. The door opened a few centimeters, just wide enough that the gas station light wouldn't slip inside and create a change in brightness someone outside might notice. Kira slid across. Slowly, without a sound, her body slipped through the gap like water passing through stone. Her foot touched the ground outside. She crouched, lowering her center of gravity beneath the line of the car window. Then she pushed the door shut, gently. Just enough for the latch to catch. Not enough to make a click someone 10 meters away could hear. She was out of the car. Kira didn't stand. She moved close to the ground, slipping through the darkness between the car and the pump on the other side. 4 steps. 5 steps. 6 steps. The darkness behind the convenience store swallowed her. She rose, pressed her back against the wall, and looked back once. Trent was still talking to the attendant. Gordon was still holding the phone. No one had turned toward the car. Kira turned and ran. Not in panic. She ran like the ghost. Fast but light. Her feet touched the ground on the balls of her feet, never letting her heels strike down and make sound. She ran through the parking lot, crossed an open stretch of land, and vanished into the trees behind the gas station. Within 15 seconds, she was more than 50 meters from the car, in total darkness. Behind her, Gordon ended his call, turned back to the car, opened the rear door. Empty seat. Where is she? His voice broke through the quiet of the gas station. Trent turned, looked into the car. His eyes widened. He ran around to the other side. The door there was shut tight. No trace, no direction of escape. Nothing at all. Find her, Gordon shouted. But find her where? Darkness surrounded the gas station in every direction. No lights, no cameras, no footsteps. Kira had disappeared, exactly the way she always did. No fight, no noise, nothing left behind. Only the empty space where she had been sitting, and the silence where she had been. Ghost. Kira ran across the open land, heading east, back toward Chicago. She had counted enough. 32 minutes by car, average speed 70 miles an hour. She was about 35 miles from downtown, too far to run, but she remembered the abandoned bus stop she had seen on the way there. The bus stop was abandoned, but the road still had traffic. She walked 20 minutes to the main road. A truck passed. She raised her hand. It stopped. She climbed into the cab. The driver asked where she was going. Downtown Chicago. The driver looked at her for 1 second, then nodded. The truck rolled forward. 40 minutes later, Kira stood at the edge of downtown Chicago. Streetlights blazed, pedestrians everywhere, traffic loud around her. She stepped down from the truck, thanked the driver with a nod, and blended into the crowd. She didn't return to the mansion. That would be the first place they looked. She didn't return to the Calder Industries building. Trent had access there. She didn't contact Ronan either. Not yet. She needed to know for certain that when she brought the USB forward, everything would be perfect. No mistakes. No being stopped halfway. Kira walked into downtown. The crowd was thick. Neon lights reflected on the wet road. She pulled the hood of her coat up and lowered her head slightly, becoming one nameless face among thousands of other nameless faces. No one looked at her. No one remembered her. Exactly as she wanted. But Trent wasn't someone who gave up easily. He knew Kira would return to Chicago. He knew she didn't have much money, didn't have a phone, didn't have anywhere to go. And he had something Kira didn't. Access to the city's traffic camera system through connections at City Hall that Gordon had built over many years. Trent drove back to Chicago, opened his laptop, began scanning traffic cameras area by area. He knew her face. He knew the way she walked. And he knew that no matter how good Kira was at disappearing, cameras didn't sleep. The hunt began. Kira kept moving for 2 hours. She didn't stay anywhere too long. She passed through the Magnificent Mile while it was crowded, slipped into a shopping mall, came out through the back entrance, crossed 3 streets, then turned into a residential area farther south. She changed direction constantly, never moving in a straight line, never repeating the same route. But she knew she couldn't keep running forever. She needed a place to stop, somewhere hidden enough to contact Ronan without being found. She found an abandoned parking garage in the South Loop. The top level was empty, with no cars and no working cameras. She climbed up through the rear stairwell, sat down in the corner against a concrete wall, and leaned her back against a pillar. From there, she could see both the stairway entrance and the ramp where cars came up and down. If anyone came, she would see them before they saw her. She took off her right shoe, pulled the USB drive from the lining, looked at it lying in her palm, tiny beneath the streetlight shining in from far away. Then she slipped it into the inner pocket of her coat and zipped it shut. She needed to find a way to contact Ronan, but she had no phone, no money. Didn't know anyone in Ronan's organization she could trust besides Ronan himself. She needed to think longer. She needed time. But time didn't wait for her. Footsteps on concrete. Light but steady. Coming from the stairwell. Kira stood at once, her back pressed to the pillar, eyes fixed toward the sound. Trent stepped out from the darkness at the top of the stairs. Alone. His suit jacket was gone, leaving only a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His hair had come slightly loose. His eyes swept across the empty garage until they stopped on Kira. He didn't rush. He walked slowly, confidently, as if he had known she was here before he ever climbed the stairs. "Traffic camera at the corner of Clark and 18th, he said, his voice gentle. "You're very good at blending into a crowd, but you forgot that you walk differently from everyone else. You walk without making sound. No one walks like that. All I had to do was filter the footage for pedestrians who didn't create normal movement fluctuation in the motion analysis system." He stopped about 7 meters from her. "Technology. Not as romantic as instinct, but more effective." Kira didn't answer. Her eyes measured the distance. 7 meters. 2 concrete pillars between them. One exit toward the ramp. One exit toward the stairs. But Trent was blocking that. Trent took one more step. "You can't run forever." Kira looked at him. Directly. Without blinking. "I'm not running. I'm waiting." Trent tilted his head. Waiting for whom? Kira didn't answer. She didn't need to. That sentence wasn't for him. It was for herself. Because from the moment she sat down in that corner of the parking garage, she had known. This wasn't a hiding place. This was the place she had chosen. If Trent found her, good. She wanted this to end. Trent understood she wasn't planning to run anymore. He took a breath. Then he charged. Fast. Kira had to admit he was faster than she had expected. His first step had already cut the distance to 4 meters. The second, 3. His hand swung toward her face. Kira leaned left. His strike swept past her right ear, the wind cutting faintly through her hair. She turned and drove her elbow into his ribs. Hit! He bent slightly but didn't fall. Faster than she calculated, he twisted back, his left hand swinging in return. Kira raised her arm to block, the force of impact traveling down into her shoulder. Strong. Stronger than he looked. The two of them fought across the concrete floor. Trent attacked continuously, never giving her distance. He knew how to fight. Not street fighting. Trained fighting. Technique. Rhythm. Kira blocked, dodged, struck back, but he wasn't easy to take down. Each time she pushed him away, he came in again. They struggled. Kira was shoved into a concrete pillar, her back hitting hard. Her breath broke for one beat. Trent pressed close, his forearm across her throat, not choking, but enough to hold her in place. Then he spoke. Between quick breaths, his voice still held that hateful calm. "You know, your father caused that fire himself." Kira went still. 1/10 of a second, but enough for Trent to realize he had touched the right place. He owed money. Owed a lot of people. The restaurant was dying. He continued, his voice lower now. Closer. He burned the restaurant himself for the insurance. My father only cleaned up what was left. The words twisted into the deepest place inside Kira, the place she thought had frozen completely after the night in the monitoring room. Her father had caused it? Her father had killed her mother? Her father had destroyed everything for insurance money? 1 second. For exactly 1 second. She stopped. Her eyes blurred, her hands loosened. Then she remembered. The computer screen in the monitoring room. The financial transaction file. The large sum of money transferred from Gordon's account to an unknown recipient 2 weeks before the fire. The money had come from Gordon, not from her father. Gordon had paid someone before the fire happened. If her father had burned it himself, why would Gordon have paid money first? Trent was lying, using a psychological blow, trying to break her from the inside because he knew he couldn't break her from the outside. The proof was inside the USB. The USB was in her coat pocket. The truth was there, not in Trent's mouth. 1 second. Exactly 1 second. Then Kira's eyes cleared again. She lowered her head, then snapped it upward, her forehead striking Trent's nose. He staggered back, his hand falling from her throat. Kira didn't give him time to regain balance. She stepped in, her knee driving fast into his stomach. He folded. She turned, her elbow dropping hard between his shoulder blades. Trent hit the concrete floor. Tried to push himself up. Kira planted her foot on his back, pressed down. Done. Trent lay face down on the floor, gasping. He didn't move anymore. Not because he had no strength left, because he understood that if he tried to stand again, the next time would be worse. Kira stood over him, her breathing even again. Her right hand held her left shoulder, where she had struck the concrete pillar earlier, aching slightly. But she was still standing, still straight. She looked down at Trent. He turned his head, looking up at her with one eye, the other pressed against the floor. "My father didn't owe anyone," Kira said. Her voice was flat, cold, "and I have proof." Trent said nothing, but his eyes changed. For the first time since he had stepped into the parking garage, Kira saw something in his eyes he couldn't hide. Fear. Kira stepped off his back, retreated 2 steps, her eyes never leaving him. Then she turned and walked toward the vehicle ramp leading down. Her footsteps were light on the concrete, not hurried, not panicked. Behind her, Trent lay on the floor of the abandoned parking garage, and for the first time, he understood that the girl he had underestimated wasn't prey. She was the hunter, and he had just become the prey. At the same time, at the mansion, Ronan knew something was wrong. Not because anyone told him, because Kira didn't come home. She always came home on time. Every day. Never once late. But today, at 6 o'clock in the evening, her room was dark. At 7, still dark. At 8, Ronan went down to the 2nd floor and knocked on her door. No one answered. He opened it. The room was empty. The blanket and pillows on the bed were still neat, untouched. The blanket she spread on the floor to sleep on every night wasn't there either. But what made Ronan stop was the pillow. He lifted it. The worn leather notebook was still there. Kira never left the house without that notebook. Never. Ronan lowered the pillow. His eyes darkened. He returned to his 3rd-floor office, opened the Calder Industries building security system remotely, checked the access logs, Kira's account, most recent activity, accessing the basement cameras, several nights in a row, accessing the old financial system, opening Gordon Ashford's personal transaction file, then a large amount of data copied to an external device, a USB drive. Ronan sat back in his chair, scrolled farther. The system log showed Trent Ashford's account had checked Kira's access history early that morning. 4 hours later, the 15th floor hallway camera recorded 3 people entering the conference room. Trent, Kira, and a 3rd person, Gordon Ashford. 12 minutes later, the 3 of them left the room, went to the rear elevator, down to the basement, out through the side gate. The parking lot camera recorded a black car leaving at 4:38 in the afternoon. Kira was in the back seat. Ronan rewound the 3-second footage, looked carefully. Kira got into the car calmly. She wasn't dragged, wasn't forced by violence, but her eyes, in the brief moment she looked up before the door closed, Ronan saw it. Those weren't the eyes of someone who had accepted her fate. They were the eyes of someone calculating. He understood at once. All of it. Gordon and Trent weren't partners. They were enemies. The kidnapping that night in the industrial district. The 4 men. The bodyguard taken down first. None of it had been random. Gordon and Trent had staged it. And now, Kira had discovered them, and they were trying to deal with her. Ronan picked up the phone. 3 calls. 3 minutes. The first call, the search team. Find Kira Ashford. Right now. Check traffic cameras along the entire route from the building west on Interstate 90. Find the black car that left the side gate at 4:38. The second call. The operations team. Gordon Ashford and Trent Ashford. Find them and hold them. Don't lose them. The third call. His private lawyer. Prepare a file for the FBI. I'll send evidence within 2 hours. Charges. Kidnapping. Financial fraud. And conspiracy to seize corporate assets. Ronan hung up. Stood. Put on his coat. Walked out the door. The cars were ready in the foyer. 3 black vehicles. 12 men. Ronan got into the first car. Said nothing more. The vehicles rolled out. 47 minutes later, the search team identified the location. An abandoned parking garage in the South Loop. The nearest traffic camera had captured Kira walking into the garage 23 minutes earlier. She hadn't been seen leaving. Ronan's car stopped at the base of the parking garage. He stepped out. The team followed. They took the stairwell, fast and silent. Up to the 2nd floor. 3rd floor. Up to the top level. Ronan stepped out onto the empty concrete floor and saw her. Kira stood about 15 meters away. back straight, coat rumpled, hair loosened, a scrape on her left cheekbone, her right hand bruised, holding her left shoulder, but she was standing, straight, and her eyes were clear. Behind her, on the concrete floor, Trent Ashford lay face down, not moving. Kira's eyes met Ronan's across the 15 meters between them. No one said anything. No waving, no calling names, no running toward each other, only looking. And in that look, between the empty concrete floor and the Chicago night wind, everything that needed to be said had been said. I know. I'm here now. You're all right. Ronan gave a slight nod. Kira nodded back. That was all. The team moved forward, restrained Trent, pulled him to his feet, and took him to the car. At the same time, Ronan's phone rang. The second team reported. Gordon Ashford had been captured at the suburban gas station and was being brought to the meeting point. Ronan ordered both of them taken to the warehouse on the east side, the place he controlled completely. The place where the FBI would come to take custody once the lawyer completed the file. But before that, Ronan wanted to see Gordon. Alone. 20 minutes later, Ronan stood inside the warehouse. Gordon sat on a chair, his hands held behind him by two subordinates. His face looked pale beneath the neon lights. Sweat dotted his forehead. His eyes watched Ronan enter and tried to hold calm, but his body betrayed him. His shoulders drew inward. His legs pressed together. Ronan stopped in front of Gordon, one step away. He didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't raise a hand. He didn't need to. He only stood there, looking down at the man who had dared touch his organization, who had dared plot to destroy the empire he had built, who had dared plant his son inside it, and worst of all, who had dared touch her. Ronan bent down, lowered his voice, low enough that only the two of them could hear. No one else in the warehouse caught a single word. You touched the one person I'll never allow anyone to touch. One sentence. 17 words, not loud, not angry, not threatening, but Ronan's voice when he said it was so cold that the air between them seemed to freeze. Gordon looked into Ronan's eyes, and for the first time in his life, he understood what fear was. Not fear of being beaten, not fear of losing money, a deeper kind of fear, the fear of realizing he had chosen the wrong enemy, completely, irreparably. Ronan straightened, turned away, walked out of the warehouse, without looking back. Behind him, Gordon sat in the chair, and for the first time in 18 years since he had taken everything from his brother's family, he trembled. Ronan found Kira outside the warehouse. She was standing beside the car, her back leaning against the black body of it, her eyes lifted to the night sky. The scrape on her face had stopped bleeding, but it was still red. Her left shoulder sagged slightly lower than her right. Her right hand was bruised from knuckle to wrist, but her eyes were clear. Her eyes were always clear. Ronan stopped 2 steps away from her. He didn't ask if she was in pain, didn't ask what had happened. He had read enough in the system logs, in the camera footage, in the way Trent had been lying on the parking garage floor. He knew enough. What he didn't know, Kira would tell him when she was ready. There was no need to force it. I need to give you something, Kira said. She reached into the inside pocket of her coat, took out the USB drive, and placed it in Ronan's palm. Everything is in here. Basement cameras, financial transaction files, proof linking Gordon to your kidnapping. She paused. And proof of my parents' deaths. Ronan looked at the USB drive in his hand, then looked up at her. Your parents? Gordon is my uncle, Kira said. Her voice was flat, not trembling, not painful, only the truth. He arranged the fire at my parents' restaurant, took everything, then threw me away. Silence. Ronan said nothing. He looked at her. Looked for a long time. And in that look, something shifted. Not pity. Kira didn't need pity. And Ronan wasn't a man who gave it. It was understanding. He understood why she didn't trust anyone. Understood why she slept on the floor. Understood why she held that notebook as if it were her life. Understood why she had saved him that night in the industrial district. Because she knew what it felt like when no one came to save you. Ronan closed his hand around the USB drive. Then he said, Gordon is in there. The FBI will arrive within an hour. He paused. But before that, he's yours. Whatever you want, I'll do it. The sentence settled between them, heavy. Ronan spoke in an even voice, but Kira could hear what lay beneath it. He wasn't only giving her the right to decide Gordon's fate, he was telling her that he trusted her. Completely. Whatever her decision was, he would follow it. Kira looked at him, then looked toward the warehouse door. Inside, Gordon Ashford sat in a chair, his hands restrained, waiting. She walked. Ronan didn't follow. He remained beside the car, watching her go inside. In the warehouse, white neon lights shone down on the concrete floor. Gordon sat in the middle, two subordinates standing behind him. When Kira entered, the two men looked at her, then at each other, but didn't stop her. Ronan had given the order. Kira stopped in front of Gordon. 3 steps away. 18 years. The last time she had seen him, she had been very small. She remembered him as large, tall. His voice loud and ringing, overpowering everyone in the room. But now, sitting on a chair, his hands restrained, sweat on his forehead, Gordon Ashford was smaller than she remembered. Older. And for the first time, weaker. Gordon lifted his head to look at her. His eyes were completely different from when he had sat in the 15th floor conference room. No more cold calculation. No more authority. Only fear. The kind of fear people had when they knew every road of escape had been blocked. "Kira," he said. His voice was hoarser than it had been a few hours earlier. "You have to understand. I had no choice. No choice." Kira heard those words and felt something stir inside her chest. Not anger. Anger had been finished in the parking garage with Trent. Not pain. Pain had been cried out in the kitchen at 2 o'clock in the morning. What stirred in her now was something she hadn't expected. Sadness. Sadness that a man could stand before the niece whose parents he had taken, whose childhood he had stolen, whose whole life he had ruined, and still say he had no choice. Kira looked at him. For a long time, without blinking, Gordon endured that look for a few seconds, then lowered his face. "You always had a choice," Kira said. Her voice wasn't loud, not angry, not painful. Only the truth, simple, clear, impossible to deny. Gordon didn't answer. His head remained lowered. His shoulders drew inward. He looked even smaller on that chair. Silence stretched on. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15 seconds. The warehouse was so quiet they could hear every person breathing. Then Kira turned away. She walked, each step even. Not fast, not slow. Her back straight, her head not bowed. And she didn't look back. Not once. She stepped out through the warehouse door, the neon light behind her giving way to the darkness ahead. Ronan stood beside the car, exactly where she had left him. He watched her come out. "Give him to the FBI," Kira said. "I don't want to become him." 9 words. And those 9 words carried everything. Every rage she could have unleashed. Every blow she could have delivered. Every revenge anyone in her place would have chosen. She let it all go. Not because she was weak, because she was stronger than that. Stronger than hatred. Stronger than Gordon. Strong enough to release it. Ronan watched her walk away, her back straight in the darkness, her footsteps light on the road. She didn't turn back. And in that moment, Ronan called her, the man no one dared come close to, the man who had built an empire from the dark, the man who had calculated every move of his life with cold reason, felt something he couldn't calculate. Not when she had taken down 4 kidnappers in the warehouse that night. Not when she had told him to his face that his test was too easy. Not when she had completed the security test in 4 minutes. Not when she had suggested fixing the system instead of punishing a person. Not when she had escaped the car at the gas station. Not when she had taken Trent down in the parking garage. But now, this moment, when she stood before the man who had destroyed her life and chose to walk away instead of destroy him in return, when she chose not to become what pain wanted to turn her into, this was when Ronan knew. He loved her. Not a loud love, not the kind people declared before a crowd, but the quiet kind of love, heavy and unchangeable. The kind that, once it came, stayed, forever. Ronan stood still for a few more seconds, watching Kira's figure grow smaller in the night. Then he took out his phone, called his lawyer. "Send the file to the FBI, right now." He hung up, looked up at the Chicago night sky, then walked in the direction Kira had gone. A few weeks passed. The city of Chicago was still loud, still bright with lights, still moving to its own rhythm. But in Kira and Ronan's world, everything had changed. Gordon Ashford and Trent Ashford were charged by the FBI. The charges included kidnapping, financial fraud, conspiracy to seize corporate assets, and involvement in the arson of the restaurant in Portland many years earlier. The USB drive Kira had kept inside her shoe that night became the core evidence. Financial transactions, camera footage, system logs. Everything matched. Everything was enough. Ronan's lawyer handled everything cleanly. The evidence was turned over to the FBI through legal channels. No trace of Ronan's fingerprints on any document. No direct connection. Exactly the way he operated. Fast, quiet, precise. 1 week after Gordon was arrested, the lawyer contacted Kira. Her parents' assets, the restaurant, the savings, the real estate in Portland, all of it was being frozen. As the sole heir, she had the right to reclaim everything. Kira sat in her room at the mansion, listening to the lawyer over the phone. Then she answered, "I don't need anything from him." The lawyer was silent for a few seconds. Then he asked again to be sure. Kira repeated it. Same voice, same sentence, then hung up. Ronan knew about it, but said nothing. He didn't argue, didn't advise her, didn't tell her to think it over. He understood Kira. She didn't want to touch anything Gordon had touched. She didn't want to build a new life on a foundation he had left behind. To her, walking away was cleaner. But Ronan had his own way. Quietly, without telling Kira, he called the lawyer. Gordon's frozen assets would be put up for legal auction. Ronan bought them all, not for himself. He used the money to establish a fund to support young people who needed to be loved, named after Kira's parents. He didn't tell her. Not yet. One evening, about 3 weeks after everything settled down, Ronan knocked on Kira's door. She opened it. He stood there, holding something small behind his back. "Come out to the balcony with me." Kira looked at him, then followed. She didn't ask why. The balcony on the 3rd floor looked out toward the south side of the city. Chicago stretched below them, millions of lights flickering in the night. The wind was light, not very cold. The sky was clear, one of those rare nights when a few stars could be seen through the city lights. Ronan stood beside Kira, silent for a few seconds. Then he turned to her. He didn't kneel, didn't take out a red velvet box. There was no diamond ring. From behind his back, he held out a notebook. Small, leather cover, warm brown, brand new. Kira looked at the notebook in his hand, then looked up into his eyes. He gave a slight nod. "Open it." She took the notebook. Her fingers touched the new leather cover. Soft, smooth, completely different from her mother's old notebook. The worn-covered one with softened corners that had followed her through the streets, through the tunnel, through fire. She turned to the first page and stopped, handwriting. But not her mother's, Ronan's. Firm letters, slightly leaning to the right, as if the person writing wasn't used to writing much by hand but had tried. For new recipes, for a new life. "Stay with me." Kira read those 3 sentences, then read them again, then turned to the next page, and she understood. Inside the notebook, starting from the 2nd page, were all the recipes from her mother's old notebook. Every dish, every line, every small note in the margins that her mother had added in pencil. Everything had been copied onto new paper, in new ink, clear and sharp. Her mother's original handwriting had faded with time, with sweat, with tears, with the flames from the night the tunnel burned. Ronan had hired someone to restore every page, read every blurred stroke, and copy down every word. The old notebook was still beneath her pillow, still intact. But now, her mother's words wouldn't be lost. They would never be lost again. Kira looked at the new notebook in her hands. Her fingers moved across the page, touching each word. Her eyes slowly reddened, but she didn't cry. She had cried enough. In the kitchen at 2 o'clock in the morning, in the tunnel beneath the overpass, on long nights in the streets when no one was there to see, she lifted her head and looked at Ronan. And for the first time in this entire story, since she had appeared in the underground fight basement on the south side, since she had walked out of the darkness alone, since she had lost everything and built herself back up from nothing, Kira smiled. Not a big smile, not ringing laughter, only the corner of her mouth curving upward. Light, brief, but real. More real than any smile anyone in this story had ever seen, because this was the first smile of a girl who had forgotten how to smile for many years. Ronan looked at that smile, and he knew that everything he had done, every call, every decision, every night he had stood outside the kitchen door watching her cry without stepping in, had all been worth it. "All right," Kira said. One word. Only one word. But it carried 18 years of loneliness. 18 years of holding herself up alone. 18 years of not allowing anyone to come in. And now, standing on the balcony in the Chicago night, she opened that door. For him. For a new life. For new recipes. 2 months later, Kira stood before a small building on the west side of Chicago. The sign in front bore her parents' names. Beneath it was the line, "A fund to support young people who needed to be loved." Opening day. The doors were wide open. Inside, laughter rang out. Young smiling faces ran back and forth. Afternoon sunlight poured through the glass doors, falling across the warm wooden floor. Kira stood at the entrance, the new notebook in her hand. She looked inside, then looked over at Ronan standing beside her. He said nothing, only stood there, beside her. As always, she didn't forget the past. She chose to carry it with her, but she no longer allowed it to define her. If this story touched you, please press the like button and share this video so more people can hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss new stories every day. How did this story make you feel? We'd love to hear what's deep in your heart, so please leave a comment below. We wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace every single day. Goodbye, and we'll see you again in the next video.